My name is Penny Clark, and today I'm going to be talking about accessibility best practices for Lightning Web Components. So, yeah, I'm a senior technical consultant at Gansett. That's my picture, and I've got my two little buns and glasses. Yep. All right, let's get into it. So, our agenda today, we're going to be talking about accessibility best practices today in 7 steps, and these are looking at what are accessibility best practices. I think you'll find this is quite a broad area, and we're going to be looking more specifically about what we're going to be talking about within the next 30 to 40 minutes. Then we're going to look at 3 different strategies for how we can have accessibility best practices. We're going to look at putting it together in LWCs, how we can check our work, and wrap up in some resources. Okay, so what do we mean by accessibility best practices? All right, so when we are building a website or a web app, every decision that we make has an impact on its overall accessibility. So this can be from language choices to page layout designs to the colors that we're picking to the way that we're laying out our page, the amount of time we're giving our users to complete interactions that we're asking them to complete, and on and on and on. An accessibility best practice is a decision that we make that opens up our functionality for the most users possible. And within all of these decisions, there are a subset that we can specifically control and influence in our roles as developers. And that is what I'm going to talk about today. But first, let's talk about the problem. Okay, so let's consider a typical development workflow. So let's picture a developer's workday, maybe yours, maybe mine, maybe someone else's. But it might start with a basic set of requirements, a wireframe, and a due date. And that due date might be tomorrow, could be today. Whatever it is, the developer moves on to step 2, which is write code until it seems as close to the expectations they got in step 1 as that they can get it. And then in step 3, if the rest of the team agrees, it goes to production. But the problem is, what if everyone involved in all of these steps shares the same usage style and the same perspective? Well, they are probably going to miss out on needed functionality that would open their component up to all the users that may need to access it. Let's take a look at what I'm talking about through this fictional example of a proposal form. So this proposal form has 3 inputs and some problems. Now, the first problem is that we do not have any input headers. Instead, there's been a decision that placeholder text will look a lot more slick, and that's what they went with. So in this case, we only have 3 fields. We have first name, last name, and proposal text. But I would think that even in this situation, once you start writing your proposal, you might think, oh, was there some instructions there? Did they give me a character limit? I better delete all my proposal text just to check what that placeholder text said again. And if there's a lot more than 3 fields, it can be really easy to get lost once we start filling them in. So that wasn't a great decision. And the next problem we have here is a mysterious button next to the submit button that just has a picture of a robot head on it. Now, this could be the best button ever, like the most awesome proposal helper of all time. I added like the theme of Dreamforce this year was AI. It could be a really cool AI button, but I'm not likely to press it when I'm in the middle of writing my very important proposal if I don't know what it does or what's going to happen. So because of that, that functionality is going to be wasted on me. And the next issue we have here is some vague error handling. We're getting an error message and it says error cannot submit. Okay, if I get this error a lot more times than twice, I'm probably going to leave this site in frustration because it gives me no indication of what the problem is or how I can fix it. Now, this is a fictional example, but I guarantee that if you now you've seen this, you are going to notice these kinds of things all over the place. And we don't want to be in that position. So, what can we do to make sure we aren't? We can follow these 3 strategies for an accessible implementation. And these 3 strategies are start with the end users, 2, seek out other perspectives, and 3, make sure we're getting our fundamentals right. Okay, starting with the end users. Okay, so if we think back to that typical developer workflow, they're not really stepping out of the idea of how they're going to use this functionality or how it's been told to them that this functionality is going to be used to consider how others might use it. And that's how we end up in that bad proposal form situation. So what we need to do is make sure we are thinking about how people are going to be interacting with our code as broadly as we possibly can. So in this diagram, we have our component represented, but then we have all these end users and they're all interacting with it in different ways. They might be interacting with it visually. You think people could be scanning the screen, looking for interaction points, looking for the information that they need, or they could be doing that same activity orally using a screen reader. And when we're scanning, looking for information, if there is interaction points, then we're going to need to operate those in some kind of physical way. Could be through spoken word or keyboard or mouse. And what we need to do now is identify which of these paths represent our own experience. And then that will help us identify the areas that we might be missing in our build. And from there, we can go on to seek out other perspectives. Okay, so ideally, we'd be able to talk. We have a bunch of different types of users on our team, and we can talk to them about how they might interact with this component to get the functionality we need to deliver. But sometimes that's not always possible. So another place we can start are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines put together by the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium. And they put together a pretty comprehensive list of recommendations and guidelines for how we can achieve those recommendations. There are a lot of them. Remember, I said that every decision we make has an impact on accessibility. And so these have been conveniently organized into 4 key areas. And those areas are perceivable. So this means that all the content on our sites must be perceivable to our users. Okay, think back to the chart, or taking a step back and thinking about our end users. Yes, all of these users need to be able to perceive our content. And it needs to be operable. Okay, when people are able to perceive it, they need to be able to use it too. So I can think about that as one of those physical areas of interaction. And it needs to be understandable. So let's not get too slick and change the context on our users without them realizing that we're going to do that. If we are going to initiate some kind of change, we need to make sure that our users are aware and consenting to that change. And this is also where that good error handling is. If we are asking our users to give us some information, we need to give them guidelines on how they can successfully give us what we need so we can all get what we want. And then finally, what we've done to achieve the other 3 steps must be robust. So that means it must be applicable to as many different systems, as far forward in time and as far back in time as possible. And then that takes us to getting our fundamentals right. So I think there's some scariness that comes from kind of thinking, oh, it needs to be robust. It needs to be applicable to all these different systems that I might not even know about. And I need to think about my end users. How can I think about every type of end user there ever could be? Well, this step will help us kind of be able to cover that area without having to explicitly know everything there ever was. Um, and let me explain what I'm talking about. Let's take a step back and think about, how does assistive technology work? So assistive technologies are built on APIs provided by our operating systems. Makes sense. Okay, this is important. What is the input for these APIs? They is the HTML content of our site. So that is one of the number one things we need to be thinking about as developers, that whatever we're doing through our JavaScript or CSS, if it's important for all users to know and it's enhancing the experience for all users, it needs to be represented in our HTML. This means that we should use standard HTML elements for standard functions whenever possible. So if we are going to have a button, let's use a button if we can. And if we are going to have a paragraph, let's use a P, because these have lots of built-in functionality that assistive technology is ready to recognize. But sometimes that is not possible. There isn't a standard HTML element that represents the functionality that we want to deliver. That is okay, because there are lots and lots of properties that we can be leveraging to give our users the information that we need. We're going to look at two of these properties today to give you an idea of how they work, and you can start thinking about how they might play into your own development. So the first one we're going to look at are roles. So roles provide context for page features that might not directly correspond to an HTML element. So in the example code, we have an unordered list, and inside of it are list items. And if you picture an unordered list, probably what you are imagining is a list of bullet points. But in this case, our list is actually acting as a list of tabs in a tab component. So a visual cue that we're dealing with a tab component would be that it looks kind of like those binder dividers. And if you click on one of those little binder divider tabby thingies, it's going to show you the content that you need on the screen below the list of tabs. So we're using roles here on our HTML elements to give the same information through the DOM. So the unordered list element has the role of tab list. So we know it's going to be containing some tabs. And then our list item actually has the role of presentation, because what it's showing inside is an anchor element that has the role of tab. So now our users know, when I click on this anchor element that has the role of tab, it's going to be showing me something new in another element that will have the role of tab panel. Okay, another function that roles can provide us that I want to talk about today is that they can create landmarks on the page, and this facilitates that scanning ability that I was talking about before. And we also have some standard HTML elements that act as landmarks, such as headers. So this is why they say, don't clutter up your page with a bunch of header elements just because you like how it looks stylistically, because what you're actually doing is creating a bunch of landmarks on your page. You're taking away from the usefulness of that function. Okay, so then the other property I want to look at today is the tab index. So in the example code, we have our unordered list again, but this time we don't have an anchor element inside of our list items acting as the tabs. The list items themselves are acting as the tabs. Okay, and if you think about a list of bullet point text, it's not usually clickable. That means that we need to add the ability to make these items clickable and focusable ourselves. And how we're doing that is through the tab index. So the first list item has the value of 0 in its tab index property, and the behavior that is introducing is making this list item element focusable. So our user can get to it through their keyboard, and they can interact with it. So when we have a property of 0, the behavior that we can expect when the user is tabbing is that they will get to this element in the order that it is presented within the DOM. And an accessibility best practice is to make sure that our DOM is arranged as closely as how the elements are arranged visually on the page as possible. Because if you have introduced some kind of different arrangement visually using CSS, chances are it's because it's providing the experience you want to provide for your users. So you should make sure that that same order is represented in the DOM so that all your users can have that same good experience. But if you do need to introduce some kind of other order in the tabbing, other than the order that the elements are presented in the DOM, you can go up the number line in the tab index value, and the user will tab to the items in the order, the numeric order that they are identified. The other value that we have for the tab index property is -1, and that takes away the ability to focus the element. So if you have a reason that you need to dynamically toggle between the ability to focus an element and not focus an element, that is how you would do that. Okay, let's look at putting these things together in our LWCs. Now, like what I was talking about with the good principle to always use standard HTML elements where we can leverage them, there's some other ways that we can be leveraging all the hard work that developers have put in for us in the past, and that is by using out-of-the-box Lightning components wherever possible. Now, the Lightning component that we're looking at right now is the Lightning icon. This is from the component library, which I'm sure we're all quite familiar with. And I've isolated it down to just the little trash can icon representing delete. So we are giving this icon name, which is action delete. That tells it which icon to show us. And the alternative text, which is delete, and the title, which is delete. Now, if at this point you're thinking, okay, great, I am done. Penny said that I can just use out-of-the-box Lightning components and all my accessibility will be taken care of, and that's great. I'll just do that, and I never have to think about this ever again. I'm sorry, you have to keep watching this video. Apologies. Because it is still important to know how these things work. Just because we have tools doesn't mean we don't have to know how they work. Let's look at what I'm talking about here. Let's think about this alternative text. So in this example, Salesforce has taken their best guess to think, oh, if we're going to use a trash can icon, we are probably using it to represent the action of delete. But that might not be the use case that we are using this for. Could be, go to trash can of our site where all our deleted files live because we don't have a recycling bin, we have a trash can. In that case, the alternative text should be go to trash can because that is the action that is delete that it is representing. There's also a time where we may not want to have it at all. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a closer look. So if we inspect this component behind the head, we can see we are getting all of this stuff from our Lightning icon component. What I particularly want to look at is the span. It's the second last line. And it's got a class of SLDS assistive text. And inside it says delete. And that is actually our assistive text that we had in the Lightning icon in the last slide. Okay, what is this SLDS assistive text? Let's take a look. Oh, it says styling. Okay, let's make a note of that because we can leverage that later. But let's see what happens when we take it away. You can see that we have text here. It's just been hidden. So our assistive text is actually there, um, next to our little trash can icon, telling the user what it does. Um, Now, if you know that you're always going to have text next to your trash can icon that says delete, no matter how big or how small you make your page, then you actually don't want to provide any assistive text to this icon because it's just going to read to the user delete, delete twice, and that's not a great experience. But a lot of times, what people will do is have any accompanying text go away and just have the icon representing once the size screen gets to a certain small size. So Salesforce has opened up this option for us to keep this text next to our icon in all cases. Okay, so what if we can't? We can't make our component out of the box Lightning components. We have to go custom. Let's say we might be building a drag and drop component. Oh man, drag and drop is so cool. But because it's so cool, it's easy to get stuck in the typical development workflow where we don't spend enough time thinking about how our end users are going to get the functionality we're providing and get too attached to a certain method of delivering that function. Okay, so let's not let this be us. Let's take a step back and start with our end users. Think, what are we building? Are we building a drag and drop component? No, what we're actually building is an interface that lets people reorder our elements. So we think about what do they mechanically need to do? They need to be able to select an element. They need to be able to move it, and they need to be able to confirm the new position. And then I also need the ability to cancel the action. What do they need to know to do this successfully? They need to know the instructions. How can I interact with this component? They need to know when they have selected an item, and they need to know where it's been moved to, and they need to know that they've successfully completed the engagement or successfully canceled the engagement. Okay, so if I think about my own usage style, I'm primarily use visual and I primarily use the mouse. So to me, drag and drop makes sense in order to achieve this functionality. So I know that for the other areas of interaction, I'm going to need to seek out other perspectives. Now, when I built this kind of thing in the past, this article by Jesse Hausler called 4 Major Patterns for Accessible Drag and Drop was extremely helpful for me. It's also Salesforce specific, so I really recommend that you check it out. And what it opened up is how it can provide this functionality for a screen reader user who is also interacting through the keyboard. And in particular, what it showed me is that we need to use this ARIA Live assertive property. If you look up ARIA Live, especially with the value of assertive, a lot of times you'll be advised not to use it because it's a pretty disruptive experience for your screen reader user. So it's valuable to me to have this perspective that, yes, this is the right time to use this property. And this is how we can go ahead and open up the reorder ability for screen reader users. Okay, so now that I know what I need to build, I need to make sure that I'm getting my fundamentals right. Let's think about it in terms of those 4 key principles. So what I build needs to be perceivable. So I'm going to need role tags for our elements. I'm going to need visual feedback, and I'm going to need updated text for my ARIA Live element at each interaction so the user knows what is happening. And what I build needs to be operable. So we need event handlers that can handle both drag and drop and keyboard reordering actions and actually reflect those changes in our DOM. And we need to make sure that focus is available for our reorderable items. And we need to make sure that what we built is understandable. Users know how they can engage with our component. Okay, when we put it all together, we get our reorder component. any style. So we can drag it, drop it, and we can select items through our keyboard, and we can move those like that as well. Okay, so let's look at some code highlights behind the scenes. So in this step 1, the user has come to the component that they can reorder. And what we have is a span, and I also use the SLDS assistive text class on it to hide these instructions. And the instructions give our screen reader user the context on how they can interact with this element through their keyboard. Tab to item and press spacebar to move item. And that is tied to our unordered list again, which is our reorderable list of icons. And it has the role of list box, and it's described by this icon reorder operation in the span. So on the screen, you can see a blue box, which I'm showing that they focused. For this demo, they're able to focus the whole component. And I have the screen reader turned on voiceover, and that's what's showing in the black box there is what's being read to me while I'm interacting with this component. So it's saying entering list box, and so list box is from the role of the unordered list. Tab to item and press spacebar to move item. That is the assistive text that I provided to my ARIA described by property for my unordered list. And then we have list box article, which is orienting the user to where they are. And then the user tabs to the first icon. And in the code highlights, you can see, got my tab index here, so the user can tab to this item. It's got the role of option. That works with the role of list box that we saw in the unordered list. And we can also see I'm using the out-of-the-box lightning icon just for our demo here, and I've given the alternative text of approved icon, and the screen reader is reading approved icon selected 1 of 3. Now, I haven't done any code to share this message with the user. That is just what the screen reader is able to pick up through what has been provided through the HTML. Okay, so we tab to our next icon, which is the delete icon, selected 2 of 3. Okay, then we press spacebar to start our reordering operation. At this point, I'm using JavaScript to send this message to my span, which has the ARIA Live assertive property. And because it's assertive and I'm adding text to the span, it's reading it to the user right away. So it says, delete icon grabbed, current position 2 of 3. Press up and down arrow key to change position, spacebar to drop, and escape key to cancel. And this is text that I got an idea on how for content-wise through that Jesse Hausler article that we talked about earlier. I also added some yellow color to the icons for this demo just to show that it's really nice to have a visual indicator as well. So even though this functionality is primarily targeted at the screen reader users, it creates awareness that it exists, and it makes it another option for people to use. Let's be real, drag and drop sometimes a little glitchy, and it also raises awareness that we should have functionality that is operable through the keyboard as well. So that's just why I have that yellow for this demo. And so the user now has pressed the up key, and it says delete icon moved, current position in list 1 of 3. Okay, in the code highlights, we have my method that is set updating the live text. So I'm calling it with the message that I want to share. So that's what's being broadcast to there. And I can see a little black box on the screen there too. That's just done from the voiceover. It's just adding that there. Okay. So then I press the space bar again, and I send my final message to the user. Delete icon dropped, final position in list 1 of 3. And then in the code highlights, I'm showing, okay, uh, we are taking away the class that gave the yellow color, and we can update the live text. And then I'm calling the reorder complete method, which is going to do whatever I need to do to broadcast that change. And it's the same method that I can call from my drag and drop. So that's kind of a great way that we can leverage our code for all the functionalities we want to use if we're planning it out in ahead. Yeah, and that was a review to some of the strategies that we can employ when we're going really custom. Okay. But what about checking our existing work? Well, these are some strategies that we can take to check the code that we have right now. And make sure you can tab to every interactive element. Try out your work with an assistive technology. Make it super easy to toggle on VoiceOver with Command F5. And if you haven't used it before, it's really good to get some firsthand experience on how it works. So you can get the idea of what your screen reader users are experiencing when they're interacting with what you built. And we can use the accessibility developer tools. I have the screenshot of those on the right-hand side here. And that is of my component that we were looking at as our example. So we can see it's showing the list box, and it's got the 3 options of the print icon, delete icon, and new note icon. It's got my ARIA attribute, role of list box already described by icon reorder operation. And then it's showing me some more information. It's focusable, it's multi-selectable is false, required is false. It even shows me the computed description text that goes with that component. So really useful to look at. And I just love that the text that goes along with each option is coming from our accessibility or assistive text that we passed the lightning icon. Okay. And when we're building and we've implemented something to improve the accessibility of our component, let's make sure that those functionality points are being passed on to our QA engineers so they know that that's something that they should test for as well. Okay, and let's remember when we're building, start with the end users to seek out other perspectives and get our fundamentals right. And here's some tooling to check out, especially the Sally test suite, which is built by Salesforce, so really useful to us as Salesforce developers. And some of the resources that I used in putting together this presentation. And these are some accessibility sessions that happened during Dreamforce, which are all really awesome. And thank you so much for watching this presentation.